good morning to you. Rishi Sunak has said the golden era of relations between Britain and China is over. In his first foreign policy speech as Prime Minister, he warned that Xi Jinping's regime was increasingly authoritarian. But he said the country's global significance could not be ignored. It comes as police in China continue to crack down on protests against Beijing's tough COVID restrictions. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our political correspondent, Louisa James, in Downing Street. But first, to Patrick Falk, who's in Hong Kong. Good morning to you, Patrick. So China has been tightening security across the country after the wave of protests, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Sean. There's really been a dramatic shift already in the past 24 hours. Security beefed up across several cities. In Beijing, there were police patrolling streets heavily last night. In Shanghai, they've set up barriers and roadblocks along Wulamuchi roads, which is arguably the site of the most significant protest that's been taking place in the past few days. So it does seem as though this movement, if you can call it that, is already dying down somewhat. And experts have said to me, one of the things is that, you know, for something like this to take hold, it really needs to be organised and structured. And for that, you need civil groups and you need activists. But under President Xi Jinping, a lot of those have been eliminated. But don't forget, this is also a big setback for the Chinese government in its efforts to try and eradicate the virus. And President Xi Jinping still has a huge economic crisis on his hands. And those are still things that the government are going to have to address.
Certainly is. Patrick, thank you. Well, the Prime Minister has faced pressure from Tory backbenchers to toughen Britain's stance on China since he took over at number 10. Our political correspondent, Louisa James, is in Downing Street for us. Louisa, Rishi Sunak suggested a hardening of diplomatic relations with Beijing, but stopped short of calling China a threat.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where words are very carefully chosen and the specific language use is very significant, especially as this was Rishi Sunak's first big foreign policy speech. So, on the one hand, he criticised China's human rights record and those crackdowns on protests. And when he talks about the end of the golden era, he's quoting George Osborne there. In his time, President Xi was invited here for a state visit and David Cameron took him down his local pub for a pint. On the other hand, though, Rishi Sunak's position on China has softened. Even in just a few months, during the leadership campaign in the summer, he was describing China as the biggest long-term threat to Britain. That word threat now seems to have been replaced by the word challenge.
Now, let's be clear, the so-called golden era is over, along with the naive idea that trade would automatically lead to social and political reform. We recognise China poses a systemic challenge to our values and interests. A challenge that grows more acute as it moves towards even greater authoritarianism.
At the same time, Sunak was saying we need to engage with Beijing, essentially because we need China's help on shared problems, things like climate change, economic stability, food insecurity. Labour have accused him of flip-flopping. The Lib Dems say his speech was tone-deaf in the light of the treatment of that British journalist. And some of his own MPs, as you say, think he should take a much tougher line on China, saying what more does a country need to do to be classified as a threat? Here is the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, agreeing with Rishi Sunak's speech, but saying we need more sanctions on China.
Already we are imposing sanctions on some individuals who have been connected to the Xinjiang repression. I very much hope that the Foreign Office is watching very closely and is going to take action on this, because the Foreign Office has got a responsibility to supervise what's going on within China. That's, I'm afraid, not my remit. And I hope that that's exactly what they are doing.
And we will get more detail on Rishi Sunak's 10-year plan for defence and security next year. But it is another reminder that he is just a month into the job, and beyond his economic policy, there's still a lot we have to learn about what Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, actually stands for.
Louisa, thanks very much indeed.